Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So yesterday we discussed the details of traveling, in particular the issues that apply to the day that you begin your journey. And then we continued by talking about what it means to be a traveler, praying on the way for the Hajj, and then we also discussed the miqat. Now remember that the miqat, basically what they do is they divide the miqat is the name of a boundary that divides all of the earth into three regions. There's one region which is called the Haram, and that's the sacred region that is sort of like the very center of that of where the Kaaba is located on that picture there. Right, so that's called the Haram. Outside of the Haram is a second region which is called the Him, and that region is a little bit wider. And that's actually what the miqat, these boundaries that we discussed yesterday, that's what they define. And then finally, outside of the miqat, everything else is foreign land. So depending on where you're coming from, you will have to put on your ihram at a particular border. So basically, just to review, if you're going into the Haram for Hajj or Umrah, right? If you're going into the Haram, but that's going to be the Haram, right? If you're going into the Haram for Hajj or Umrah and you're coming from the outside, then you need to enter into a state of ihram before you cross over this border, which is called the miqat. Actually, the Prophet ﷺ in hadith defined several locations which are actually pointed out here. Right? For example, Yalamlam is one example. Hulayfa is another example. So each of these cities are actually, or not cities, actually they're regions. Each of these regions was defined by the Prophet ﷺ, and then that's what causes this map to be drawn out. So this is actually from hadith. So what happens if a person's coming from the outside and they intend to go into this region, before they cross over this line, they need to put on their ihram so that they can enter into this region in a sanctified state. If they intend to go someplace other than the Haram, other than this region, for example, Medina, which is out here, it's permissible for them to cross this line, land in Jeddah, and then simply go straight to Medina without entering a state of ihram. Okay, so that's one group of people. The second group of people are the people who just happen to live in this area. You know, there are some people obviously that are going to be living in this area. So those people, they will put on their ihram in this area. They don't need to go outside of the miqat. They put their ihram in this area because they're outside of the Haram. Whether they want to do Umrah or Hajj, it doesn't matter. They'll put their ihram on in this area and then enter into the Haram when they want to make Umrah or when they want to make Hajj. Finally, there is a group of people that will be existing within this region, right? Whether they be, for example, the people who live in the Haram itself, or whether they be somebody who came into the Haram and then performed Hajj, right? Performed Umrah and then took off their ihram. People in this region, it depends on what they want to do. If the person is in this region and they want to perform Hajj, they can just put ihram on and go for Hajj. If a person is in this region and they want to perform Umrah, they have to go outside of the border of the Haram, put on their ihram, and then cross back in. And the nearest location to Makkah Mukarramah is a masjid called Masjid Aisha. And Masjid Aisha is about 15 minutes away. So when would that occur? Let's say that you basically came from Chicago. You came from the outside and you were going for Umrah. Let's say you're going to go for Umrah next week. Okay? No, not next week, this week. So let's say you're going to go for Umrah this week. Now as you're crossing over, you're going to put on your ihram, you're going to land in Jeddah, and then you're going to go into Makkah Mukarramah and perform your Umrah. After you perform your Umrah, you'll have your head shaved or your hair cut, and then subsequently, you're going to now be a normal person. You're no longer in ihram, and you're just going to enjoy Mecca. Now, let's just say that then you decide that you want to do another Umrah. So you say, now I want to do a second Umrah, let's say for my mother or my father or whatever it might be. But you're already in the Haram, right? So now what you're going to do is you're going to take a taxi and ask the taxi driver to take you to Masjid Aisha. When you go to Masjid Aisha, you'll be outside of the border of the Haram. You're going to put on your ihram, take a ghusl, put on the clothes of the ihram, pray 2 rak'ah salah in the masjid there, and then say your talbiyah, and that's going to put you back into the state of ihram, and then you're going to cross over and go and do a second umrah. So that's the example of you being already in this haram and then needing to put on an ihram for umrah. All right, and the case of Hajj will actually become clear as we move along. Alright, so I discussed the miqat in general. Then finally, the last thing that we discussed was the whole issue of the ihram itself. Basically, the ihram is a sanctified state that an individual must enter before they can enter into this special area of the planet Earth called the Haram. And the ihram, it constitutes a particular type of clothing, and it requires an intention. It's often prefaced by 2 rak'ah of nafil salah. And once an individual does all of that, they basically take a ghusl or make wudu, change their clothes, put on the clothing of the ihram for a male, and make sure that everything's covered properly for a female. And then subsequently they're going to offer 2 rak'ah, and after they offer 2 rak'ah, once they make the niyyah and they recite this talbiyah, which we talked about yesterday, once they recite the talbiyah, that locks you into a state of ihram. Now you have to go and perform Hajj or Umrah in order to remove that state. The only other way to get out of that state would be to send a sacrificial animal into the sacred precinct, have it sacrificed there, and then that would also remove you from that state if, for example, something happened that once you got into ihram, you were not able to end up in Mecca. Alright, so these are the things that we covered yesterday. And now what I would like to do is to go into details concerning the ihram. Now yesterday I mentioned to you that the word ihram in the Arabic language means to make something haram. And basically, really that's the key thing about the ihram, and that's the challenge that exists when a person is in a state of ihram. If you want to think about the state of ihram, the best analogy that we have is the takbir tahrima. Now remember that when you stand up for salah, the first thing that you do to enter into salah is you say takbir tahrim. Now that takbir tahrima, what does it do? It's called tahrim. It's interesting because it also comes from haram, right? It makes everything haram on you. So now if you say Allahu Akbar and you bind your hands, what happens? Now talking is haram. If you talk, your salah breaks, right? Moving your chest away from the qibla is haram. If you do so, your salah breaks. Eating is haram. If you eat something, your salah breaks. So what happens is that when an individual does the takbir tahrima, they enter into a whole different state, and the rules of their existence change completely. Because why? Because basically they've entered into the court of Allah spiritually. When an individual stands up for salah and says Allahu Akbar, what they're really doing is they are leaving this world for a few minutes, and they're entering into a whole different realm, which is the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the same way, the individual who enters into a state of ihram is basically cutting themselves off from the world. And they're basically now entering into a whole new part of this dunya, which is the haram itself. You know, they're entering into a new state. They're entering into a new existence. They're entering into a new conceptualization of what actually the world is. So the ihram is like takbir tahrima of salah. Now there are several types of acts that become prohibited once an individual enters into a state of ihram. Okay, the first and the most important is that basically all type of romance between a husband and wife become prohibited. This includes verbal, physical, embracing, kissing, anything of that nature becomes absolutely impermissible. Alright? The individual becomes focused on Allah and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And the only love that now exists in that person is going to be towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, basically, what you have to remember is that this is such a prohibition, this is so prohibited, that if an individual has relations with their wife while in a state of ihram, for example, if they're going for Hajj, the whole Hajj becomes invalidated. Alright? If an individual has relations with their wives in the state of ihram when they're going for Hajj, the whole thing is finished. You're done. Alright? You still have to stay in the ihram and you still have to do everything that you do, but the Hajj is invalidated and you have to come back again. You can't even make it up. You can't make tawbah. You can make tawbah for breaking this rule, but your tawbah will not change the fact that your Hajj is gone. That's a really serious thing to remember, that basically all forms of romance become prohibited. So that's the first thing that the state of ihram prohibits. The second thing that the state of ihram prohibits is the ability to hunt or to assist in hunting of a land-dwelling animal. Even an ant is prohibited. All right, so you're not going to be killing ants. You're not going to be killing flies. I mean, obviously, I don't think anyone would really be hunting there, right? But basically, this is the concept that you have to have in your mind, that you cannot harm even a fly. All right, and that's a very important concept to recognize when you're in a state of ihram. Now, you might think that, well, okay, what if somebody else hunts something? Can I eat that, right? So you can eat the food that's hunted by a non-muhrim, but you yourself cannot hunt. So it's permissible to eat meat that's been slaughtered, etc., but you yourself cannot hunt. So that's the second prohibition. Prohibition 1 is romance. Prohibition 2 is hunting. Okay, the third prohibition is any type of fragrance. You cannot apply any fragrance. Now this is one that often people make mistake on, because what happens, you go by the ether shop, the guy's handing out free ether to everybody that walks by, you stick your hand out, that's our habit, right? But you're in a haram, you can't do that, all right? Similarly, what happens is we come from America, we bring our scented products. So you have your scented chapstick, you're putting it on, and it's got the scent on it, you can't put that on. Be really careful. Similarly, we bring our soaps from America. Every soap has its own fragrance mixed into it. So you cannot even wash your hand with scented soap. You got to really think twice and be very careful about this particular ruling, because this is the one where the mistakes occur with. So you want to be very careful that you do not apply fragrance on any part of the body, on any part of the clothing of the ihram, etc., and in any manner. You have to watch out for scented foods and scented drink. Now there's some natural scents that arise from food. Doesn't mean you can't eat. What we're referring to is fragrance. All right. So like chapstick, where it has that special, get the multiple fragrances in the chapstick. So those types of things you want to be really careful about. Whatever you take with you, take unscented. If you're going to take lotion, which is everybody carries lotion with them, especially from America, you take unscented lotion. If you're going to take soap, take unscented soap. If you're going to take toothpaste, take like the most original flavor with no scent in it. All right. So this is an important prohibition to be aware of. So the first prohibition was romance. The second one was hunting. And the third is application of any fragrance. The fourth prohibition is removing hair or nails from any part of the body. So you are not allowed to cut your hair. You are not allowed to pull out any hair. You are not allowed to trim your nails. You're not allowed to bite your nails. Now some people, they have the habit that when they get nervous, they start biting their nails. And obviously this is a nerve-wracking experience. You're waiting in line for 7 hours to do something that takes you 6 minutes. It's going to make you nervous. It's difficult, right? So remember that in no way, shape, or form can you pick off hairs. People sometimes when they get nervous, they start twisting their beard or they start twisting their hair, because it's just the way by which they relieve stress. Or they start biting their nails. That's all prohibited. All right, in general, biting nails is prohibited, by the way, and same with plucking out hairs, but in particular in this state. Now, if the hair falls off naturally, let's just say you go like this, because you see a hair in your hand. This happens, people, they freak out because they know that this is the ruling. If it naturally comes out, that's okay. But you are not going to start rubbing your hands through your hair. You're not going to comb your hair. You're not going to run your fingers through your beard. And when you make wudu, you're going to be particularly careful to just get the water in the areas where it needs to be without necessarily running your fingers through your beard. So this is an important prohibition as well. The next prohibition is stitched clothing. Stitched clothing in the shape of the body or sealed footwear for men. Now obviously women, their ihram is different. They're going to be wearing stitched clothing. They're going to wear their normal stitched clothing. They're going to wear their normal shoes. But the male cannot wear any stitched clothing in the shape of the body whatsoever. Nor can they wear any sealed footwear. So see this bone, this upper bone here? This bone has to be uncovered right here. The top portion of this foot bone. This bone needs to be uncovered. So you will be wearing sandals the whole way through this trip while you're in a state of ihram. No socks, okay, and no shoes. So be particularly careful about this. The central bone of the foot, that's the surface of the central bone of the foot here, has to remain uncovered. All right, now when you go through these prohibitions, there's some common questions. All right, sorry, there's a few more prohibitions. Let me just mention those. The next prohibition is covering the face or the head. So obviously a male is not going to have their head covered, and in no way are they allowed to cover their head. So nothing will come over the top of the head, and nothing will come over the face for both males and females. No fabric can be touching the face. Now, let's say that an individual sneezes and they cover their face with their hands, that's permissible. All right. All right, and the final prohibition is harming any Muslim. Now, I told you can't harm an ant, so obviously you're not going to go and harm a Muslim. I think that's pretty straightforward. But the reason why we mention it is because among the tensions of Hajj in particular is the fact that Muslims, you're going to be interacting with Muslims, and all the Muslims that you interact with are all trying to do the same thing at the same time in a very restricted place. So that creates a degree of tension amongst people, especially when you're, for example, trying to kiss the black stone or trying to do your tawaf, etc. It's a very, very tense moment. So you want to remember that harming any Muslim in any way, shape, or form is impermissible in a state of ihram. Basically, you're going to be a little docile lamb, and you're just heading towards the Kaaba, madly in love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, there's some questions that arise once you understand these prohibitions that we should discuss so that you don't get confused. Okay, the first is that the head could not be covered, right? But an umbrella or a shade is permissible so long as it does not touch the head. Now, you'll see that it's very hot, and you'll need to walk through some distances in that heat, and it's permissible to carry an umbrella to protect yourself from the burning, scorching sun. So although that's over your head, it's not counted as touching the head, so therefore it's permissible. Similarly, wearing a ring is permissible, wearing eyeglasses is permissible, wearing a hearing aid is permissible, wearing a watch is permissible. So these things are all permissible. Now there's a special circumstance, which is a belt. And this is not just any belt. We're not talking about the belt that you use to put on trousers. We're talking about a particular type of belt in which an individual can carry money and carry their passport. So there's a special belt that you can purchase that is permissible to wear because of the necessity to protect your belongings in this journey where there's so many people present at the same time. So these belts are called Hajj belts or Ihram belts, and you'll find them in the stores. They're these thick leather belts. They wrap around you tightly, and what they do is they provide pouches which are protected that can be used to carry your money with you, a copy of your passport, etc. So keep that in mind. There's different belts that different people recommend. There's one in particular that I can recommend. I can show you it later. But basically, I just want to highlight this point that according to the scholars, a belt is permissible. A money belt or a belt that's used to hold your passport, that's permissible. All right. Now, if you're wearing the ihram and one piece of the ihram becomes dirty, let's say that you go into the washroom, you use the restroom, and as you're using the restroom, the ihram becomes soiled in some way. It's very difficult. You're not used to using this cloth and wearing this cloth, and it's not easy to control it if you're not used to it. So it can get soiled. It's not something to be ashamed of. Now, then people start getting confused. They say, I'm an ihram, I can't take the ihram off, right? But remember, the ihram is a state. It's not the name of it's also the name of the clothing, but it's really a state. You can change the two pieces of cloth. You can keep changing those two pieces of cloth every day if you like. It's not practical because you're not going to be carrying and lugging around, 7 changes of ihram as you go on the trip. But here's what I recommend, and that is that what you do is you put on your 2 pieces and keep one backup piece. So that if the top part gets dirty, you can chuck it and you have a new one. And if the bottom part gets dirty, you can replace it and you'll have a new one. And if you're pretty comfortable with the ihram, let's say you've gone on Umrah, you've gone on Hajj, you're pretty comfortable that you know how to handle the ihram, then just carry one between 2 or 3 friends. Between 3 of you, we'll say there's 3 of us, let's carry one extra piece so that if someone's gets soiled, we'll have a backup. Now, you can also always take off that ihram and wash it. So if it does get soiled, you can wash it 3 times, rinse it out, and put it back on. It'll be pure. So that goes into the whole fiqh of purification. I don't want to go there. But you can take those ihram pieces off and replace them with new ones if the need arises. All right. It's also permissible to wash the body. So you can go into the shower and take a ghusl, but you shouldn't do so to remove dirt. There will be particular points throughout the trip where a ghusl will actually be sunnah. There are a few places, and we'll mention them as we move along. But you don't do this to remove dirt. Basically, what you're doing the ghusl is either it's so hot you want to cool your body off, right? So you don't get sick, or it may be that you are trying to fulfill a sunnah at a particular junction of the trip, and we'll again talk about that later. And finally, if hair falls off naturally, as I mentioned earlier, that does not invalidate the ihram. and nor does it bring a penalty upon you. All right, some other things that are permissible. Covering your body with a blanket or a sleeping bag is permissible. Now this confuses people because they say, well, wait a minute. They start looking at the sleeping bag. They say, is it stitched or not stitched? Remember, what did we mean by stitched or not stitched? We meant stitched in the shape of clothing, in the shape of a body part. And I mentioned that before, and I said I was going to explain why. That's why. So a blanket is permissible. A sleeping bag is permissible, even if it's stitched, because it's not stitched in the shape of an organ. Right? It's not stitched in the shape of the arm, etc. But your head and your face must always remain uncovered. So you're not going to take the blanket and put it over your head. You're not going to put yourself in the sleeping bag and then zip it over your head. Your face will remain uncovered, your head will remain uncovered, your body will be within the sleeping bag. Now then some people think, well, if I lie down on a pillow, my head might sink into the pillow and it might start covering me in some weird way. The pillow is okay, all right? Using a miswak is okay, and if you have to carry a load on your head, like for example, if you have a heavy suitcase and you just can't pick it up anymore and you want to just put it on top of your head, or you have a child, right, with you, and you just can't carry that child anymore and you want them to sit on your head, and now they're going to put their hand on your head and you're trying to take their hand off because you don't want your head to be covered, right? That's okay. You can carry a load on your head. All right. Now, well, obviously you entered into the ihram in a state outside of the miqat, right? And this whole discussion applied outside of the miqat. Now what you're going to do is you're going to arrive at Saudi Arabia. So this is the next step. All right, the moment that you arrive at Jeddah, this is the moment when you got to really, remember I said write patience on your hand? This is when you look down at your hand and remind yourself, patience, patience. Because this is when it really begins to get difficult. I'll tell you, the moment the plane lands, before the plane even touches the ground, people are ripping their seatbelts off and grabbing their bags and they're rushing towards the door because they want to get out, right? And they've heard all these horror stories about having to wait in line, and they want to just get in line and get done with it. But you're not going anywhere. All right? You have a long trip ahead of you, and you have several bus rides and several deserts to spend many hours in. So you might as well just forget about the whole concept of time. In fact, just get rid of your watch. Because time just stands still. There is no concept of time there. Right? You can say, somebody can say, how long should it take to go from Mecca to Mina? 5 minutes. How long will it take? 5 hours. Okay, it may not be 5 hours. Maybe it'll be 50 minutes, but it's not going to be 5 minutes. So the whole concept of time goes out the window, and you just forget about it. Forget about time. Just you are basically there in a state of ihram, and you are there in the presence of your Lord, and you just now forget about anything else. It's just labbaik, Allahumma labbaik. Just relax, get off the plane gently, calmly, take your place in line, and whenever it's your turn to be checked in, you'll be checked in. Likely it'll take hours. That's okay. And it's scary because it's like from every door people are coming. You get off your plane, and then you start thinking that, okay, you know, like, I'm here now, and then you see this huge group of Chinese Hajis come in. And then all of a sudden this huge group of Indonesian Hajis come in. Then this huge group of African Hajis come in, and you're just looking around you thinking like, where am I going to, which line am I going to get in? Which is the fastest line? You know, the Americans, they're looking for the 10 items or less line. There is no 10 items or less line there. You have to get in line. I mean, you'll see. It's amazing the moment you land how you start thinking. You start worrying, and you know the pressure builds up within you that that's it. I need to get in line. I need to look for the shortest line. And come on, let's go quickly and cut this way and cut that way. We're going to get. I think that line is moving faster. So just get in any line. You're going to get through it. It's not worth getting flustered over. Just basically check your patience in at that door. Right. Now once you get through all of this, the checking procedure and the stamping of your passport and all that, you're going to check into an office which is basically the office of your muallim. Now the muallim is a little bit of a confusing issue, so I want to discuss this a bit. What happens is that in Saudi Arabia there are several offices. And these offices, each one is run by a person called a muallim. Muallim in the Arabic language means teacher. And what used to happen in the good old days is that you would basically be assigned to a muallim so that when you landed in Jeddah or when you arrived in Mecca, the muallim would greet you, welcome you. He would be like your personal host, you know, and he would take you to your hotel, show you where your hotel is, and then he would say, meet me downstairs in this much time. Then he would take you and introduce you to the Haram, to the Masjid, to the Kaaba, and then he would take you and say, let's do tawaf, let's go do, he would teach you how to make the tawaf. He would then take you for the sa'i, and then he would advise you, he would serve you. This is the way the muallims used to be. Right? Now that concept has totally changed. They still call them muallim, but basically there's not much ta'lim going on. Alright? What they do now is they're organizational people. They have individual offices. They're assigned, maybe each office carries the load of, let's say, 1,000 hajis, maybe probably even more than that. And what these muallims do is that they are responsible for your particular, for your buses and for your tents in Mina and your tent in Arafah, etc. So this is going to be your muallim. Pretty much besides that, they're not going to do much more. When you get to Jeddah, you're going to check in with your muallim. They're going to greet you. They're going to put you on a bus, and they're going to take you to the best way to get to your hotel. And then they'll basically drop you off, and you'll be in your hotel. And you probably won't even see them for the rest of your time in Mecca, except when they come to pick you up to take you to Mina. So the first day of Hajj in the morning, they'll come and pick you up in their bus. They'll take you to Mina. They'll drop you off at your tent. And then they'll kind of be around here and there to help you out if you need something. If there's an emergency, you can usually find them somewhere. And then they will help you to take care of that emergency. But for the most part, you're on your own, which is why most groups have scholars with them to assist you through the journey. So the muallim more is an organizational guide. They kind of organize various parts of the trip for you, the bus rides, they send the bus drivers, they hire their own buses, etc. And that will help you to get through the trip. But besides that, they're not going to teach you how to do the Hajj or the Umrah for the most part. Alright, so the muallim will set, once you get out, you'll be in this huge Haji tent. It's a really neat place actually. It's almost like a mini city. It's people are coming in and coming out, and you'll come out, you'll gather together with your group leader or the Amir will go and check in with the muallim. The muallim will basically take all the passports, and that's the other thing. They take your passport from you. It's very nerve-wracking to give up your passport, because we're always taught, keep your passport in your pocket, keep an extra copy here, keep an extra copy there. Never give anybody your passport. They take your passport. And they take it and they just have stacks and stacks of passports, but they manage to get it back to you in the end. But basically they will take your passport, they will just put a big rubber band around all the passports, and it's out of your hands after that. So then they will transport you, they'll get you into the Haram, they will transport you to your hotel, and then you will go and find your hotel. Now as you're driving, basically you're going to probably land in Jeddah, right? And either you're going to go to Medina, Munawwara, and then visit the Prophet ﷺ, and then come back, put on the Ihram, and come back into the Haram, or you're going to drive from Jeddah directly into the Haram. In either case, somewhere along your trip, you're going to cross over this border, which is the border of the Haram. Now, that border is a very special border. That obviously is called the Haram, as I mentioned earlier, and it symbolizes a very special place on the planet, which is the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the way you want to think about it. Now, once you enter into this area, it is unlawful for you to hunt, trap, or frighten any animal. It's unlawful for you to chop down a tree. It's unlawful for you to cut a blade of grass, etc. All these things become impermissible in the Haram. Whether you're in Ihram or you're not in Ihram makes no difference. You cannot do any of these things within the Haram. So when you enter this area, you want to recognize that you are entering a very special precinct. So you want to enter with humility, and you want to enter with the words labbaik flowing from your lips. So labbaik, Allahumma labbaik, etc. Now there's a dua that the ulama basically transmit for entering into the Haram, and that's this dua. And these duas become burdensome sometimes to memorize if you don't have that much time before your trip. And I'm not going to necessarily say you need to memorize every single dua, but it's important to read these duas and read their translation. Because when you read these duas and you read their translation, then what ends up happening is you get an idea of the feelings that should exist within you as you enter into the Haram, and some of the types of duas that you should be making, even in your own language, as you enter the Haram. So the dua that you're supposed to make when you enter the Haram is Allahumma inna hadha haram. Oh Allah, right? Verily, this is your Haram. I am entering basically into your Haram. Wa haramu rasulik, and the Haram of your messenger. Faharrim lahmi. So make haram my meat, wa dami, and my blood, wa alvmi, and my bones, wa bashari, and my skin, ala now. So as I am entering your sacred precinct, right, in which many things become haram, in the same way, oh Allah, make my meat and my blood and my bones and my skin all haram for the hellfire. Allahumma aminni min adabik. Oh Allah, protect me from your punishment. Yawma tub'atu ibadak. The day that your servants are raised. Waj'alni min awliyaik. And make me from among those who are your friends. Wa ahli ta'atik. And among those people who obey you. Wa tub alayya. And turn towards me with repentance. Innaka anta tawwabur rahim. Verily you are the oft-turning and the forgiving. So, the oft-turning and the merciful. So basically, this is a dua that should be used when you enter into the haram. Now again, it may not be easy to memorize it. If you can memorize it, that's great. And what you see a lot of people doing is they carry these books with them, right? And every time they need to make a particular dua, they just are kind of like reading through the book, but they're struggling and they're trying to read it, and you know, you lose a lot of the emotion involved. This is a very strange kind of ibadah, this being in ihram and going for Hajj and Umrah. Basically, it's about the way you want to express yourself. So you can, in the English language, you can make the same dua. As you enter the haram, what you want to be cognizant of is that I'm entering into the haram, I'm entering into a very special place. And just as Allah has made harming any individual or anything in the haram impermissible, in the same way, Ya Allah, now I'm in your haram, so don't allow any harm to come to my bones, to my blood, to my meat, to my body, etc. And allow me to be among those who protect themselves through worship of you, and allow me to be forgiven for my mistakes, etc. So these are special points in the journey. And that's really what I want to highlight, is that when you get to a special point, you want to take advantage of that change of state. Now, once you cross the haram, right? So if you go back, once you enter into the haram, you're going to now head towards Makkah Mukarramah. So as you're doing so, you want to consume yourself with dhikr. This is the time to be reciting very fervently, labbaik, Allahumma labbaik, etc. And the moment you arrive, you want to establish yourself in your room first. Now some people think that, okay, I'm just going to leave my bags and run. I'm finally here. I want to see the Kaaba. I want to go into the masjid. My bags will get taken care of. That's not the way to do it. Your bags will be gone in 5 minutes if you leave them, because it's just so many people and it just gets so confusing. Establish yourself first. Take your time. Go to your room. Put your bags away. You know, make a ghusl, which is a recommended thing, even if purity exists. If you can't make ghusl, make wudu. You know, prepare yourself. You're presenting yourself at the throne of Allah. You're going to basically one of the most sacred places on the planet. So get yourself prepared. If women are in a state of haid, which is the menstrual cycle, or nifas, the bleeding after childbirth, they cannot go to the masjid. So they'll wait in their room until the opportunity arises to either head for the Hajj or to enter into the masjid. Alright, now once you get yourself ready, you've established yourself in your room, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to head to the masjid itself. And heading to the masjid itself, basically, you're going to do so with humility, and you're going to be reciting the talbiyah. So now you're really going to be reciting it, you know, reminding yourself, labbaik, Allahumma labbaik, to the end. Now when you go towards the masjid, your next goal is to enter from one of two doors. The first door is called the Salam, Babu Salam, and the other is called Babu Umrah. So I'll show you a map. This is basically the Haram, probably in a way that you're not used to looking at it, but that's the Kaaba. Okay. This whole area is called the Mataf. The Mataf is the area that you spin around, circling the Kaaba. And this area here, this long extension, this is Safa and Marwa. So we'll talk about this when we talk about Sa'i. Anyway, the masjid is huge, all right? And there's all this marble out here that basically outlines the border of the masjid. And what you want to do is you want to locate one of two doors. The first door is called Babu Salam. Where is it? It's right here. See that gate there? All right. And the other door is Bab Umrah. Here it is, Bab al-Umrah, right here. So these are the two gates that you're going to try to enter from. Now I'll tell you that this As-Salam gate is really tough to get to, because the hotels are usually out here, or they're out here, and it's a really long walk to get down there. And despite the fact that you think that you have energy, it's not easy. It's very tiring. Number one. The other thing, number two, is that they often keep this door closed. This salam gate is often closed. So you'll like hike all the way down. Your hotel's out here, you'll take your whole group or maybe yourself. You make this huge hike, and then all of a sudden you get there and the door is closed. So I wouldn't necessarily put too much emphasis on going in from this door. You might want to try for the Umrah gate, which is a little bit easier. So the idea is to enter from one of these two gates if possible. If not, you can enter from any gate, but you're just trying to do this if it's possible. Remember that when you enter the masjid, this is the beginning of your training. So you're going to enter the masjid with the right foot, which is the sunnah, which we should always be doing. But in particular, in this masjid, which is the greatest masjid on the planet, and then you're going to make dua and niyyah for i'tikaf. You're going to make the standard dua for entering the masjid, right? Allahumma aftah li abwaba rahmatik, and then you're going to make the niyyah for nafil i'tikaf. And we talked about this. Remember, there's three types of i'tikaf. There's the wajib i'tikaf, which is when you say, oh Allah, I swear that if you make me healthy again, I will do 2 days of i'tikaf. Or there's the sunnah i'tikaf, which is the 10 days in Ramadan. And then there's something called nafil i'tikaf. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, the nafil i'tikaf is 1 day. You need a full 24 hours. But according to Imam Muhammad, rahmatullah alayh, basically the nafil i'tikaf is even a moment. So you're going to take advantage of basically saying to Allah that for this period of time I'm entering into your masjid, I make the niyyah of sticking myself to the masjid, which is basically i'tikaf. Alright, you will not perform tahiyatul masjid. Now you know tahiyatul masjid is the name of the salah that you pray when you enter any masjid in order to greet the masjid. Here you don't do tahiyatul masjid. Instead, you're going to go and perform tawaf. And tawaf is the way, the tawaf of the umrah is the way by which you greet the masjid. So in this case, you're not going to perform tahiyatul masjid. So again, this was just to highlight, this image just highlights the two different doors. By the way, there's a very good map put out by Ar-Rashad. Ar-Rashad or Ar-Rashad? Ar-Rashad, right? That's the name of the book? Ar-Rashad. Huh? Ar-Rashad. Okay. Anyway, you can find it on the internet. But this image is an image from that map, and basically that map is a big map that shows many of the different locations in both. There's two maps. There's one for Makkah Mukarramah, one for Medina Munawwara, and they explain some of the rights of the area, the rights of the Hajj, the rights of the Umrah, and they present some images which are really helpful. So I would recommend that map. All right, now then. The next thing, when you enter into the masjid, is you want to situate yourself in a place where you can easily see the Kaaba. But you want to be away from the crowd. So this takes a little bit of maneuvering. So you're going to get yourself into a place where you can easily sit in front of the Kaaba, but you can avoid any crowd. And so this is your first sight of the Kaaba. And then basically you're going to say Allahu Akbar 3 times. So you can say Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah. So that's 3 times. Then you're going to read salawat on the Prophet ﷺ. And then you're going to make dua. Now this is a very special place to make dua. Just like when you cross the miqat and you put on the ihram, you're going to make dua because you've now entered into a special state. Just like when you cross over the border of the Haram, you're going to make dua because you're entering into a special place. Now you're seeing the Kaaba for the first time, whether it be the first time in your life or the first time after some sort of hiatus. Basically, this is going to be a very special time to make dua. In fact, it's a highly accepted time to make dua. And there's big discussion amongst our scholars as to, well, since this is a time when dua is really accepted, when an individual first lays their eyes on the Kaaba, what types of dua should be made? So different scholars have written different things. The two big ones that I think are noteworthy, the two big things to make dua for that I've seen that in various writings that I think are noteworthy is number one, that you make dua, Ya Allah, enter me into Jannah without taking any account. That actually is the goal of life. If you can have that much, nothing else matters. If somehow someone can guarantee you that you can enter into Jannah without any account, what else is there in life? That's what life is. The definition of life is being able to get into Jannah, and the hope is you can get there without any account. There is no greater reward. So that's the first dua that you make. The second dua that you make is that, oh Allah, accept all the other duas that I make throughout my life. Right? So that's the other big dua that you make, so that every time you make dua in the future, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept it. So you can stand there and you can say, Ya Allah, I'm visiting your home for the first time, and this is the place where du'as are accepted. So Ya Allah, I ask you only for two things. Your treasure is so vast, you could give me billions of things. I'm asking you just for two things. Number one, Ya Allah, enter me into your Jannah without taking any account, because only you have the power to do so. Right? And number two, I ask you that anytime I ask you in the future for anything, and that is good for me in my deen, and it's good for me in my dunya, that you grant it to me from your infinite treasure. See, this is all about love. You cannot sit there and read a book, like you're reading this just like a parrot. This journey is not like that. This journey is about love. You basically are sitting there and you are in the court of Allah. Your du'as are being accepted. You're in a whole different state. So that dua has to come from your heart. You'll see that like people stand in groups and one person says, Allahumma, and then everybody says, Allahumma. Then he says the next line and everybody repeats the next line. That's great, and inshallah it's going to be accepted. But really in your heart you want to, in your own words, make your own supplication between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's where the heart of this matter lies. And then at the same time you can read these du'as that you find in books, etc. Nobody's stopping you. But I think you really need to have a little bit of your own interaction here and develop a little bit of a relationship with this deed that you're performing. Alright, now once you see the Kaaba and you've made this dua, then the next thing is that you're going to go ahead and you're going to begin your Umrah. So the next lecture this evening will be performing the Umrah, inshallah.